You'll need to keep track of all the books, journal articles, newspaper articles, websites, blogs, tweets, all the information sources you draw on in your essays so that you can cite and reference them. Failure to cite and reference your sources is plagiarism, so we need to stay as far away from that as possible. If you've been asked to cite and reference your sources in IHS style, here's how to do it. Step 1 is to find your style guide. IHS style has 3 parts. A tiny superscript number that briefly interrupts the body of your text, indicating a footnote, and it simply says, "Here I am drawing on something I've read." There's the footnote itself, and then a reference in your bibliography. The footnote and the reference in your bibliography provide enough information for anybody looking for your source to be able to find it. A style guide will tell you exactly what your footnotes and your references in your bibliography need to look like. The style guide we recommend for IHS here in DCU is of course the latest edition of T.W. Moody's Rules for Contributors to the journal Irish Historical Studies, and it can be found at this link. A few tips for using any style guide like this. Tip 1 is to approach it according to the type of source you need to cite and reference. Tip number 2 is to get into the language of the style guide and to use the Control and F function to skip to the section you need. For example, you might search for book or article in a periodical, which is how the style guide describes a journal article. And tip 3 is to look at the examples and to follow their lead exactly in terms of punctuation and spacing. They're often easier to follow than the instructions themselves. Say I want to refer to something on page 200 of this book. The information I'll need to record about it is that the author is Juliana Adelman. The title is Civilized by Beasts, Animals and Urban Change in 19th Century Dublin. It was published in Manchester by Manchester University Press in 2020. So how am I going to format my first footnote and the reference in my bibliography in IHS style? The instructions we need are in the style guide, and because it's a book, to find out how to format our footnote, we'll go to the section called Citation of Printed Sources. For the first footnote, we read that we're going to write the author's initials spaced out. Note that a single initial is not acceptable, but 2+ would be fine, or a forename spelled in full and surname. So because we don't have a second initial, J. Adelman will not do here. It has to be spelled out in full, Juliana Adelman. Then we'll write the full title, including subtitle of the book, and we'll put it into italics. And we can see from the example that a comma and a space go between the author's surname and the title. Next comes the place of publication, followed by a comma and a space and the date of publication in rounded brackets. Then we put the page number preceded by a P dot, so P dot space 200, and a full stop goes after that. And again, we can see from the examples that a comma precedes the P dot. If the section you're referring to runs over a couple of pages, you would write PP and the page range. Notice in the examples that there's no dot after PP. If I refer to this same text again in the same essay, I can shorten the second and any subsequent footnotes or citations like this. Page 14 of the style guide tells us to use the same rules for the references in our bibliography as we do for our first footnotes, except that in our bibliography we're going to invert the surname and first name or initials. In other words, we're going to put the surname of the author first. So our reference in our bibliography for this book will look like this. Notice that the page number appears in the footnote, but not in the reference in our bibliography. This is because the reference in the bibliography points to the work as a whole. To correctly cite and reference a chapter in an edited book, we're going to follow the rules in the style guide for any piece in a larger work on page 3. Say we've been reading Vanessa Rutherford's chapter called Muscles and Morals, Children's Playground Culture in Ireland 1836 to 1918, which appears on pages 61 to 79 of this book, Leisure and the Irish in the 19th Century. This book was edited by Will Murphy and Leanne Lane and published in Liverpool by Liverpool University Press in 2016. Again, we're going to follow the examples provided to us in the style guide, so in our first footnote we'll write the author of the chapter's name in full, followed by a comma and a space. The title of the chapter goes into single quotation marks. Following the example, we write in, and the 2 full names of the editors, because again we don't have 2+ initials for either of them. EDS in rounded brackets goes after their names. Then comes a comma, a space, and the title of the book, as before, goes into italics. The place of publication and the date of publication, separated by a comma and a space, go into rounded brackets, followed by a comma. Finally, a space and two P's to indicate a page range, followed by the page numbers, and it all ends in a full stop. Like with books, if referring to this same source again, we would get to shorten the second or any subsequent footnotes to something like this. And our reference in our bibliography would look very like our first footnote, with just the author's surname and forename inverted. To correctly cite and reference a journal article, we're going to follow the rules in the style guide for an article in a periodical on page 2. Say we've been reading this article by James Kelly, which appeared in the Journal of the History of Childhood and Youth, volume number 9, issue 2, back in 2016. The article spans pages 233 to 246 of that issue. Following the instructions and the example given, we're going to format our first footnote as follows. We'll write the author's forename and surname in full, followed by a comma and a space. The title of the article goes into single inverted commas. There's a space, the word in, another space, then we put the title of the journal into italics and follow it with another comma and a space. The volume number goes into small Roman numerals, and because we have an issue number as well, we'll follow the volume number with a comma, space, NO dot space, and a 2 for issue 2, and then another space. Next comes the year of publication in rounded brackets, followed by a comma, a space, two P's, a space, and then the page range of the article, followed by a full stop. In our second and subsequent footnotes, we might shorten to this. And again, we'll format our reference in our bibliography much like our first footnote, but it starts with the author's surname. So that's it, a very brief introduction to citing and referencing in IHS style. It's really worth spending a bit of time with the style guide. There's a lot more detail in there than what we've managed to cover here. For example, when to use capital letters, the ampersand, etc. And there's also information on how to cite and reference sources you find online, newspapers, parliamentary debates, multi-volume works, and so much more. Generally, our advice is to stick to the style guide and you won't go far wrong. If you have questions, please get in touch.